as Rachel said, I've come from a slightly different angle than just music, although I do cross over with music quite a lot, and sound and audio work through my curatorial work, also obviously Arts Council, because there's a whole department there. So I tend to either talk of one or the other. I think tonight it might be good maybe if I work with both hats on a little bit and try and quickly zoom through in the next 5-6 minutes of like the process of commissioning and what I was looking for when I'm working with artists, and then also audiences, and also maybe quickly what Arts Council is looking for, because most of you might want to apply at some point, or if you haven't applied already. Pronoun started off as a commissioning kind of platform, it quickly became a little gallery space, and then now gone off-site again, so it kind of moved around. I've got this piece up here, because I could talk about it as an example around commissioning and the focus on audiences, because this one's very specific. But basically for me, I got into commissioning because I was a frustrated artist, and the closest thing to being an artist is to working with artists. And I think that's true for most commissioners, producers, curators, probably collectors too. And so once I got to work with them, I got to realise what I wanted out of that relationship, because you're no longer the artist. And it's through trial and error, but really what it came down to for me was obviously having fun is actually the most important, and that was the feedback from my audiences in general. Is don't try and do something because you think it fits, or because the discourse is telling you to, or because financial reasons and you might sell more tickets. Just have fun. It's always been the core, and that's what I always talk about in Arts Council as well. I'm talking to artists who come in for one-to-ones. It's all about having fun. I'm going to move on, but I quickly, for me, the point that became interesting where the shows became good. Well, I think so. It's when we started getting reviews and the peers were being positive, was risk-taking. And that risk could be artistic, it could be about audience engagement, it could be about all sorts of different things, but ultimately it was about stepping outside your comfort zone. And that was what I was always trying to push the artist to do for each show, especially towards the last ones, when I was more confident myself. And sometimes it might not work, but it never fails, because failure is this kind of someone else's opinion, and as long as we got something out of it and we had fun, we felt like we succeeded. And that's what I also, again, come back to in Arts Council is we shouldn't really be afraid of this idea of failure, especially when there's a risk being taken, because we're all, as human beings, actually quite open to that and we quite embrace that. And there's nothing worse than pushing something that you're comfortable with and then going to those same audiences and engaging the same people, and you're just kind of self-fulfilling this routine. I'm already halfway through actually, so if I'm looking at, in terms of curating, the things I was looking for, so the first one obviously is this kind of satisfaction for the artist, for myself, and for the public. But really it was also about being part of, and discourse is maybe not the best word, but I will use that one, a conversation. And that discourse can be trend, so some spaces, whether they're music or visual arts, are really picking up on the new trend and they present it very well. Or it can be theoretical, or you can be all about furthering the art form, this kind of innovation, which isn't obviously trendy. You know, there's some great spaces in London who don't get the kind of hype that some others do, but actually they're the ones pushing boundaries. The obvious are always going for quality and originality, but I guess that's a given. And then an important one for me in terms of commissioning was it's got to fit, because you're commissioning not just one person at one time, but you're having a whole career potentially out of this. And if you're starting to be a bit disjointed, or it doesn't make sense for your core audience, or even for the press that might start reviewing you, following you, and even just for yourself in terms of personal taste, it can quickly go wrong. So sometimes there's artists I wanted to work with, and I could see it wasn't going to go the right way, and I put an end to that before we formalised things. And location, I think the more I've gone off-site, the more you've got to work hard on the planning ahead, and that gets quite complicated in terms of prep. I think when you have a space, it's a lot easier because you've got a base that people come to. You've got your social media building around it, all that kind of stuff, you know. But as soon as I started working in the public realm, it became a very different game, because there's a lot of sensitivities to each and every area, which are well beyond what we could expect, and a lot of them sometimes are irrational, but you've got to go along with it. So doing something in that part, you might come across some really strange requests or rules that you can't consider, you can't acknowledge unless you've really put the time in. And that is a little bit of consultation. I'd say the most important is partnership, and that's spreading out. That could be local businesses, youth groups, can be spaces like this. It could maybe be the big HSBC tower in the background. But the more voices you bring in, the more you build up that energy. And then that comes in to the same useful info, and then you can just click on the next tab. Is that Arts Council? And I'd be really up if any of you want to think about funding as well. I think for this is all about a couple of really important things to remember. A step change. So if you're going to apply for money for your project, make sure you come in at the right time. The money's always there, it's always rolling every week, every month, constantly, 24 hours a day. So don't come in and put all that effort in and then be unsuccessful. Come in when you, again, it's all about feeling good about yourself, feeling positive. Also about the project's at the right time, so maybe you've done a few things. And it comes to what the same hurdles I was facing as my personal career in commissioning. It's the same ones for Arts Council. Take a few risks and try to step outside your comfort zone. And as soon as you step out your comfort zone, that's when you start engaging new audiences. That's when your work might take a different route. It doesn't matter if it goes wrong for a while, it'll probably build on that, get better. But I think those are, for me, the main kind of core elements.
Perfect, cool, so we're going to hear from Kira Blakey next, who's a curator for Art on the Underground for TFL. So obviously has quite an obvious correlation to the music travelling and everyday interactions topic, but she'll also chat a little bit more about the general kind of multidisciplinary art idea.
Hi everybody, my name's Kira Blakey and I'm a curator at Art on the Underground. And I'm going to talk today about travelling with strangers, everyday interactions, the provocation that was set by Spitalfields Music for you. And I'm going to talk about it in the context of the projects that we commission at Art on the Underground. So Art on the Underground was set up about 20 years ago by Transport for London, and it's a public art programme that commissions new artworks for multiple sites across the whole of London Underground. And these vary in format and scale and ambition, and also whether they're something permanent or temporary. So on the one hand, we commission permanent artworks that are much more part of the infrastructure of a station. These are hugely ambitious projects, and they can take anything from 2 to 10 years to realise. And they're much more created with the architect, so they become part of the environment and the backdrop of a station. And they're very much about thinking about and celebrating how arts can improve the environment that we exist in. So one example is the Danielle Buren at Tottenham Court Road, which opened recently, and that took 10 years to produce. And it was produced in line with a massive station upgrade, which you might have seen happen. And on the complete other side of the spectrum, but equally as important and engaging, are temporal and transient projects. And one that I thought would be really interesting for you was a collaboration with a contemporary composer called Matt Rogers and the London Sinfonietta that took place at King's Cross Station. And that was born out of almost a period of in residence on the Underground itself. So Matt Rogers, the composer, spent about 12 months getting to know the tube network. And by that he would interview station staff, he would ride in the front cab with train drivers. He spent a long time travelling the network and recording all those kind of small nuances of sound that we take for granted when we're using the tube or travelling around the city every day. So everything from the sound of the escalators to the sound of the trains coming into the station. And he created a new composition that was performed by the London Sinfonietta. And this existed in 2 different formats. The first were a series of individual performances whereby the performers each started at different stations and they performed solo, travelling on the tube itself. And then they all gathered together for a huge ensemble performance at King's Cross Station. So on the one hand, it was a kind of performance that tube users could just encounter, They didn't have to be going anywhere, it could just become part of their journey. It would obviously be a slightly odd encounter. And then the other sort of main moment or element of the performance was this huge crescendo ensemble performance at King's Cross Station. And that was much more akin to something that maybe a non-arts audience might be more used to experiencing. So it would be something that I would call a destination performance. It would be something that we would advertise and that we would expect people to know about through our advertising, and that they would go to watch, like a normal theatre performance, for example. Whereas the first part was definitely something that you would encounter. So I thought these would be two kind of good opposing examples to talk about. The other project that I wanted to talk about is a non-music performance, but I think it's really interesting because it poses a lot of questions and a lot of kind of exciting ways to think about how we might engage in the public realm or in non-arts spaces. And that's a project by Jeremy Deller called What is the City But the People? And for this project, he compiled a manual of quotes, some of them famous quotes, funny quotes from really famous plays, philosophical quotes, and he wrote them and he compiled them for the Piccadilly line station staff, and they were given to the station staff to read out over the standard tannoy or standard train announcements. And it was a way of trying to inject an element of humanity into a journey. So whereas you might normally hear the standard announcements about what station you were arriving at, please move out of the way, these were supposed to humanise the network, and they had that wonderful sense of kind of encountering something funny, something that you wouldn't expect to hear. And it's something that I really remember, and it was the reason why I wanted to work for Art on the Underground. So I thought this project might be interesting for you to think about in terms of how do you engage in a non-arts audience? How do you engage a transient audience who aren't there in the kind of hypothetical space to engage with art or music? What are the challenges you might face in a non-art environment? For example, logistical, health and safety, operational hours. And how could you work with this challenging environment instead of against it? So I think that's something that I always try and get artists to think about when I'm working with them. The Tube is such a busy space, and people aren't there to engage with the arts. They're kind of heads down, they're on a mission. So how could we work with what's already there? And I think Jeremy Deller's project did that really well because it worked with the train announcements, it worked with a structure that we were used to instead of adding more to what is already incredibly competitive and busy environment. And the final thing that I always say to artists is site-specific. So what is the site? Who is using it? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How are they doing it in the morning? And how are they doing it in the evening? So I hope a few of these things might be interesting for you when you're thinking about your project. Thank you.
Now we've got Mira Kalix, who is, she's a composer that works with technology and lots of multidisciplinary art forms. This is a video of her moving museum project, just a 5-minute clip, and then she's going to tell you a bit about it again from the space.
How the Chinese read to how our eye follows this painting, and this idea of one person, the connection between one person and the painting. It needs to be what you think is right for the painting. Yeah, I think if it feels right for the painting, it's right. So we are not trying to make things easy for our audience. We are trying to make things true. You understand? So if If you think this needs to be noisy, it needs to be noisy.
Make every class.
No, that's not what it's about. Some people will like it, some people won't like it. This is life, yeah?
Just make what I want.
You must make what you want and what you think fits.
Here we go.
I'm listening.
可以用一些其他的音乐元素来代替，我觉得这是一幅非常非常有意思的图画。
Gravity is making everything fall and shatter.
即视感像是火山迸发一般的冲击力。
Bus will arrive, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So do the fills time interludes.
But it's 6:30.
Oh, you need to eat, yeah.
We need to have dinner. So
What shall we do for dinner?
yes.
Pizza.
You want pizza?
I'm paying.
Our country.
Tell me.
A boy named Naja. She have lot of this.
Ribbons.
The color is red.
Oh.
Just like No, 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 no. 我一个原来你是哪吒。哎呦，不要说，他跟我说不要说了。真的屁。
Hi, I'm Mira Calix, and I'm really sorry I can't be with you all tonight. I'm busy writing some music and working on a project. I asked Rachel to show you a video of it that I did 2 years ago in China, just to introduce you to my work, for those of you who don't know what I do. And I think it really does sort of answer to travelling with strangers, everyday interactions, as you saw from the making of. It touches very nicely on the first question I've been asked, which is, what, in your opinion, is important to the creation of a new work? And for me, it's really about location. Now, this can be a concert hall, or it can be a bus, or it can be any other sort of a public space. I'm personally really interested in working in that field. I really love the idea of people encountering work and creating interventions, so that's what I'm most interested in. You will all have different sort of perspectives on this, and I realise that. It maybe answers slightly less to the classical music meets, but because I create so much work that is both classical instrumentation and electronics, I sort of feel, and there is actually a lot of classical instrumentation in that work in particular. I mean, with classical music, as we sort of term it, and there are lots of questions about this, it is obviously generally considered to have a very specific home or location, and I think it's really interesting when you take it out of that environment and you bring it to people and you allow them to experience work and assess it on whether they enjoy it or not, rather than on what its cultural context means or what they think they know about a particular musical genre. And I'd sort of stress that I think these things are really important. But in order to try and move quickly through these questions, the most important in the creation of new work is really the location, the environment. I consider what I do to be environment building, but it takes place in another environment. And I'd say really consider, what does that space sound like? What are the acoustic principles? Is it a busy space? How will your work sit in that environment? These are the most important things before you do anything. I think they will inform either, if you have an idea, you're looking for a specific site, and if you don't have an idea, then really be open to that site influencing the concepts, the narrative, and the actual sound, the instrumentation and the materiality of what it is you do. So yes, location. It says, the next question is, why are you so interested in working with technology and creating multidisciplinary work? For myself, I use technology a lot, but I tend to try and use it in an invisible form. And I also really always work to the lowest technological sort of tools that I can use in order to execute a work. I do a lot of installation work as well as performances, but really I'm interested in installation. And ultimately, nobody cares how clever you've been. What they really want is for the thing to work. There isn't a gallery, museum, or bus stop in the world that wants to phone you and bug you on a daily basis, because even though you've created a sort of the most genius thing, it doesn't actually work. So I would say go hi-fi, go lo-fi, but go the way that you know, test, and something that is reliable and solid. Use technology that has been tested and developed by people who whose job that is, basically. Those are my fundamental principles. And with the bus, we kind of went really down to like pencil and paper as far as interactivity, and that's because it was the most appropriate thing, and I have no problem with that, as well as using computers and custom-made software and all those things. I'll happily use things that are off the peg, and I'd recommend you to do that too. Just do what works and what works best for your idea and concept. That's really what's important. As far as creating multidisciplinary work, I think it's because I'm interested, sorry about the dog barking in the background, but I'm interested in building environments, creating spaces for my work to be experienced, and therefore that will lead to multidisciplinary either collaborations, or I work visually as well myself, but often working with a fabricator. So again, it's if you can't do something, or you don't feel like you have to do something all by yourself, trust and rely on people who are really experienced in this matter. Ask questions, do research. These are all my pieces of advice. My approach is really the work shouldn't be able to exist if you remove an element. If the answer to that question is this doesn't work without a piece of video or a hanging fruit basket, then you need the video or the fruit basket. If the work can exist without those things, then why are they there? Nobody needs or wants decoration. Everything should have meaning and purpose, and those should be the things that influence bringing in a multidisciplinary approach. I think it should have purpose, and there should be space for you to either collaborate or to push yourself in that way. And I think it's being really considering that very seriously. If it's not something you normally do, then really look for people you admire, interested or working in. This could be your excuse to finally approach them. And this is I sort of think I've half answered excuse me, the next question, which is what does cross-art form work bring to music? And I think it brings an environment or a sensibility. It can bring an aesthetic, but what it should bring is something that executes the artwork to the needs that it requires. That's really what it should bring to music. It should not be superfluous or decorative. It should be there because it absolutely has to be there. It's essential, and that could be the sort of space that you're in without doing anything, or it could be really bringing in other things into those space and really considering what those materials are. Next question for me is, where do audiences sit in your thinking throughout your creation process? I do really think about audience because I think of how an audience acts in that environment. Are they just passing through? Have they come to sit down and experience it? So again, that will influence the nature of the work itself, the composition, the multidisciplinary aspect, all those things. But I also tend to think of audiences as participants in the work. I did on the bus. That whole project sort of stemmed out of an article I'd read in 2014, a year before I'd gone to China, that said at least one museum had opened every day. And that small sort of article, which I'd kind of filed away in the back of my mind, kind of sprung about this work. And I was interested in asking this question of what happens when we bring the museum to the people as opposed to the people to the museum. I'm giving you these as examples of how I considered then that people were participating simply by commuting, but then how did I involve them further? And we did that with technology in referencing earlier questions. There were QR codes, there were things that they could sort of pick up through their smartphones, but then I was also aware that a lot of people getting on that bus don't have access to smartphones, so going for that lo-fi approach as well, and sort of making the work for them just as much as people who wanted or were able to access further things. People who might just come through your space and just only have a few seconds to experience things. The most valuable thing you can ask of any audience member is their time, and so it's really considering how you get them to stay longer and be involved in the work. I'm obviously not there. I wish I was, because you can't really ask me questions directly, but if there is something specific, then do come back to me. You can find me through probably every social network if you want to, and I hope that I've been helpful in some way. I mean, everything I'm saying is very important to me, and you will all have your own lines of where your work sits in a public domain, what kind of work it is you do, and so forth and so on. But yeah, I think enjoy it, and just do something that really works for the space and environment that you've been given and that you've chosen, and that involves people and gives them some sort of meaningful interaction in helping you create whatever it is that you're after doing. And I look forward to seeing your work in the near future. Thank you.